Good afternoon, everyone. This is Rosemary at Good Journeys Tarot, and today we are going to be talking about the Justice card. And before we do, as I have been, I want to talk a little bit about what I've been up to this week and things that are coming up. I am still planning live with Nina from Shuffle Tarot in the coming weeks. We almost have that together. And I am also working on a hashtag cards that don't work for me. So there's all those cards in decks that you get and you're like, oh well, this one card just doesn't make sense, or these two cards, either the artwork doesn't work for you or their understanding of the card is different than yours, that type of thing. And while I do mention those usually when I'm doing walkthroughs or reviews of decks, kind of want to revisit some of those and talk about what doesn't work for me and why. And so the hashtag may change depending on what I finally settle on, but you get the idea. So look for that later this week, probably on Wednesday. And so the full moon was last weekend, and it was the full moon in Aquarius. And so I spent a little time reading and creating, as it were. And so I used the Star Seekers Tarot last weekend, and ended up making a essential oil based on Aquarius, and using this card to charge it during the weekend. But I had received a sticker from the creator when I purchased the Starseeker Tarot. It is the star card. And so I cut it in half and I used it to make a label for my oil. So it was actually based on a spell jar that I saw online. And so, yeah, I'm enjoying this oil and reminding me to be my truest self. So, so now that we've talked a little bit about what I've been up to and what is coming your way, let's talk about justice. This is the card that I drew last Sunday that we want to visit today. I have been working with her all week. If you've looked at my Instagram, you've seen a lot of what I'm going to talk about, but you haven't heard all of the commentary related to the cards. So let's hop right in. First, I want to look at some cards that are from my collection that I really love in Justice. This is from the Fyodor Pavlov Tarot. It's a gorgeous depiction of Lady Justice. And the Latin there actually has a significance, which is not rolling off the tip of my tongues right now, but just a beautiful depiction. This is from the Ellis deck. I love how they created balance with the dark and the light there, emphasizing balance, which is part of justice. And again, it's a beautiful woman with a sword, upright, and scales, which you find in many cards. Here is the Uncommon Tarot. Again, a woman with a sword and scales. This is a gorgeous deck. It's a collage deck, which I never thought I would work with, but has become one of my fast favorites. Of course, my cat's getting into something now. This is the Golden Thread Tarot. They decided not to include a person in this image by Tina Gong. And it's beautiful. It incorporates the sword and the scale into one image, giving us the meaning that we understand for that card. This card, at first glance, I did not realize that this was a woman, but if you read the commentary in her guidebook, Robin Scott identifies this as a female police officer. Police officer is probably a little problematic for some people. However, it does actually encompass what we want to see in our law enforcement, which is that justice is blind, i.e. they don't see race or wealth or any of those things, but only whether or not people are obeying the law, right? And so I do love this deck. This is a deck that encompasses a little of the Thoth and the RWS. In this case, she did name her card Justice rather than Adjustment, like the Thoth. An idea that we're going to talk about in just a second. And finally, from the Mystic Garbage Tarot, we have Justice, the little voodoo doll, because sometimes, you have to take things into your own hands, I guess. Though I don't highly recommend that. This is the coloring that I did this week of the Justice card from Teresa Reed's tarot coloring book. I did make her a person of color to emphasize that inequity that exists, at least in the United States, if not other countries. I also gave her gray hair to indicate that with age comes wisdom, wisdom being very instrumental and vital to good judgment or exercising justice. And that's an interesting slip of the tongue there, justice versus judgment. And this is a debate which comes up a lot. Like, what is the difference? Well, the difference when I read for justice and adjustment, justice and judgment, is that justice is part of the second septenary, which is your relationship with the world around you, and judgment is your relationship with the divine or higher self or God or however you want to define that other in the universe. And so then judgment becomes about the spiritual and justice becomes about the physical world. And that's really the way that Waite looked at justice. It was about the law of man. On the opposite side of that, in the Thoth, Crowley looked at it as law of nature. So saying that the law of nature isn't fair and that this is part of your spiritual journey rather than your relationship with the world around you. So the idea that justice is fair is something that is not agreed upon. All right. Some people don't see it as fair. So this might be more a Crowley view of the law of nature being defined here versus the law of man, which many of us would like to see it defined as, and as it being equal, which is why sometimes we see the blindfold on the justice card because we want justice to be blind. We want it to be equitable to everyone. In her book, 78 Degrees of Wisdom, Rachel Pollack made an interesting comment about justice, and that it is based on the idea of we're getting what we deserve, basically. So everything that's happening now is based on what we've done in the past, our past actions, as it were. And so in that way, it's not blind. Justice is a response to what we have done and the decisions that we have made, and not so much about it being fair, but being what we deserve. And so, and she relates it to fortune telling in that way. In order to practice good wisdom and thus good judgment, we have to learn from our past experience. And in the reverse, wisdom comes from making good decisions and bad decisions in the past. So let's talk about some keywords for this card. We have, and while we're doing that, I'm going to pop up my version of the card that I did for you guys to see. And there we go. I didn't change much. You'll see she still has the purple veil behind her, the yellow sky, and her sword and scales. It is a female. One of the reasons that I brought up whether or not Justice was female or a lady is that in his book, Daniel Loeb talks about this image, which is the RWS image, being Solomon sitting on the throne of David, dueling out wisdom and justice. And in some books, it talks about this figure in the RWS being androgynous, but I have never looked at this card and thought it was not a female. And in Rachel Pollack's book and many other books, it talks about how this card is based on female figures, goddesses, etc., that center around justice. And so it just makes sense that it is a lady rather than a man. In fact, Daniel Loeb is the only one who actually referred to this card as anything other than a female. And it just makes sense to me that it is female because it is on that path between Gabora and Teferet, where you see mercy. You see strength and beauty, which are things I would tend to associate with the feminine. And so I guess that's my my 2 cents about whether she's actually a lady or not. So the scales here are about balance and equity or equality. The swords are about knowledge, about cutting to the heart of the matter. Also about justice being active. It's not passive. It's actually something that is ongoing and isn't just observing. Okay. And then the pillars are, of course, severity and mercy, which we see in a number of cards in the major arcana, and adds to that duality which exists in the justice card here. We have the relationship here between the magician and justice, as well as the high priestess and justice, i.e., our true action, the magician personified, okay, comes from wisdom, okay, which is what the high priestess offers us. And then then the reverse also, as I mentioned, is true, is that wisdom brings on true action. So again, that high priestess and magician energy, which we see here in the number 11 in the weight deck, where whether you see that as the epitome of 1, or if you see it as 2, it relates back to those earlier cards in this way. It's about weighing all of the options, all of the information, looking at your past and making a truthful judgment on what you have done. Ways that this might come up in a reading besides balance are truth, cause and effect, the law, even equity, objectivity. We get some of the same keywords we might with the Queen of Swords. She does lack the balance scale, but she does have that sword for cutting to the truth of the matter. This card can also be associated with karma. There are a few cards in the tarot that are related to karma. We have, of course, the Wheel of Fortune, which I'm currently working with on another project. And we also have judgment that sometimes comes across from a karmic standpoint as well. As a result of your spiritual journey rather than your physical world journey. It can be about integrity as well as decisions, as I've mentioned. And the shadow side of this card is that sometimes it could be indicating that there's unfairness or lack of accountability, dishonesty, legal problems, prejudice, or even punishment. Exercising that sword over the scale in your actions. Okay. Another thing that came up, which I thought was interesting, is a quote from Cicero: "Justice renders to everyone his due." This was from the Loeb book, and this reminds us that eventually everything comes back in a circle, right? This is something we see in the wheel, which is then continued here in this card. It's not just about the cycle, but it is about what we learn and what justice is done upon us as a result. In the end, this card is about getting what you deserve. And it calls for us to make the best decisions that we can and to apply the things we have learned from our past to our present, to make judgment as we pass uh, it upon ourselves, at least in our physical world. When we get to the judgment card, we will be talking more about the correlation between justice and judgment. But again, I want to emphasize that for me, in reading this card, this is more about the physical world than the spiritual world, which is the way I like to differentiate those cards. I want to thank you guys for being here and listening to me talk about my study of justice this week. We are going to be continuing this as I pull other cards every week to study. This week's card, interestingly, we had one of my favorite cards followed by a depressing card, followed by another major arcana. And this week, we're getting back to a little bit of a depressing card. And that is going to be the Nine of Swords, that nightmare anxiety card. Look for me on Instagram, posting some of my favorite cards, some of my thoughts, coloring, and eventual creation of my own mock-up of that card during this week. And don't forget to look for my video on cards that don't quite work for me on Wednesday. Until next time, everyone, good journeys.